If you'd like to learn how to create a GUI timer that counts down on your screen until it gets to 0 and then resets, keep watching and I'll show you exactly how to do it. Hi everybody and welcome to Roblox Snippets. Alright, you would have noticed in the example there that I showed at the beginning of the video, I've asked you to download some resources from my website, and that is to save a fair bit of time in me showing you how to do this. So once you have downloaded that zip file and unzipped it, if you come up to the workspace to begin with and right click and then come down to insert file, and these instructions are on the website, you need to locate the files like this. Okay, we have two files for this project, and one of them will be workspace. I'll just try to make this a bit bigger. Alright, workspace trigger GUI part, RBXM, and this one up here. So if you've selected workspace here, WS stands for workspace, go ahead and click on open, and it will insert this timer part into the workspace. And the other one that we want to insert is for the starter GUI. So come down and left click on starter GUI and then right click and insert from file and find the SGUI file and go ahead and click on open. Now if it doesn't appear initially, it's probably because it's not enabled. So you'll see it appear in here, but just come down and click on the enabled box and it should appear on the screen. Once you have both of these items in here, we'll have a very quick look at them. The one up in the workspace, if we expand the timer part, you'll see that it has a surface GUI in it. And if we expand that, we have a text label with the number 5 in it. And that's going to represent how much time will count down on our GUI as part of our timer. So you can change these a bit later, but just for now, leave them as they are. Coming down to the timer GUI, if we expand this, you'll notice we have a frame inside of our GUI, and we have 3 text labels that are stacked one on top of one another. Now I have made changes to each of these in terms of their color and etc., and how they are stacked on top of one another. I'll talk about that during the video. However, don't change any of these attributes or properties in here unless I tell you to, because otherwise it just won't work as shown. Alright, so if you've got both of those things in here, we are ready to begin, and we will start on the coding. To begin with, we will come up to our timer part and we're going to insert a script. So click on the timer part and then click on the plus and then click on script, and we'll change the name of our script to be called trigger script. And you can get rid of the print hello world in there. Now this script, what it's going to do is when the player runs onto this part, we're going to make this disappear temporarily, and it's going to trigger the timer over here to run when we get up to writing that part. But just to begin with, to get the code sort of basic structure in here, we're going to write the trigger script that will just simply make this disappear and then reappear after a few seconds. So in our script up here, we'll begin by creating a variable for the part itself. So we'll call that trigger, and that will be script.parent. And just below this, we'll create a variable called db and set it to true. Now if you haven't used this before, db is short for debounce, and it is used to control how often this script will run, and you'll see how that works down below in just a minute. Now you saw we had a number 5 on our part, so we'll put in here this timer as a variable and set it to 5. Now we've got 5 in here. Of course you can change that, and if you wanted to, you could come down to the text label and scroll down to the properties down below here till you get to the text, where you'll find text 5, and you can put in there whatever you like. Okay, it's in seconds, however, so don't put in 3 minutes 5 seconds or anything. Just keep it as a number in there, and then you would need to change your trigger script here to reflect whatever the number is. Alright, down below this, now we'll handle when a player touches this part. So trigger dot, and it will be an event, so the event is being touched, and when it is touched we want to connect a function to it, and we add a parameter in here, and it can be called anything you like, but I use hit, and that represents which part of a character, like its foot or its hand or etc., is hitting the trigger. Alright, and we pass that into the function. So your function should look like this, and now we'll add in the code. For this particular example, we only need to get the player and not the character. Now, normally we would create a variable here called character, and it would be hit.parent, because if a foot hit it, then the parent of the character's foot would be the character itself. However, we can skip that and just get the player by typing game.players and then a colon and get character, get player from character, and put in here hit.parent. And I'll get rid of this window over here, and that will get us the player using this information. So if it's not a player, then it's not going to work. And for that reason, just below, we'll create a conditional statement to say if DB, so if this is true, which it is to begin with, and it is a player, then. Alright, now I only put player here because conditional statements test these if they are true. So if there is a player, that will be true, and this will be true, therefore this will run. So to control our script, the first thing we do is we set DB to be false. And then down towards the end of the script, we'll add a task.wait of, say, 3 seconds. Well, I'll make it 2 seconds. And then we'll set DB back to true, which means if a player touches this part, this code in here can only run every 2 seconds. Because if they run onto it again, this will be false, and it will skip all this code until DB resets to true. Now that we know that we have a player, what we want to do is get a hold of the GUI. Now, if we come back and just have a look, this is our GUI here, and bring up our Explorer. And you'll notice that the GUI that we brought into here is inside this folder called Starter GUI. Now, Starter GUI actually changes to become Player GUI when the game runs. So we need to get access to this folder in order to create a variable to handle our timer GUI. So the way we do that is we'll say local player GUI equals, and we'll be looking in the player. So player colon, and we'll say wait for child player GUI. So it has to be exactly like this, capital P and a capital G, and wait for child ensures that it has loaded before the code runs, and it cuts down on the chance of errors. Now, when the video began, if we just have a look at our workspace view, you'll notice that this was not enabled. And that's the idea, because what we want to do is enable this when the timer is running and then turn it off again when it's not. So to begin, when we run the script, come down to the Starter GUI and click on the Timer GUI. And if you don't have your properties, alright, so we've clicked on Timer GUI, just turn the enabled off so that we can't see it. And part of this script now, if we come back to our trigger script, will be to create a variable that will let us turn the GUI enabled back on. So just below this, we'll say local timer GUI, and that will be equal to player GUI, and then we'll also wait for child, and then timer GUI. And that's the only variable that we really need to, or item that we need to get a hold of in order to make things start to happen. So the first thing we'll do is we will enable the GUI, just like we turned it off just then. We'll turn it on by saying timer GUI dot enabled. So that's the property we want to change, and then we want to change it. At the moment it's false, as you can see, not ticked, and we change that to true. Okay, so checkboxes are always true or false. So ticked is true, not ticked is false. Now the GUI will pop up. Now what we want to do is change this part's transparency to 1, which will make it invisible. So that part is our trigger. So we can say trigger dot transparency equals 1. And when we do that, so fully visible is 0, transparency 1 is completely invisible. Now we have one other thing that we need to also make invisible, and that is inside of, up here, our our timer part that we just made invisible, we've got this surface GUI here, all right, which will still show this text label if we don't also disable this. So in here we'll say trigger, and we could have made a separate variable for this, but we can just say, well, the surface GUI is in the trigger, so trigger.surface GUI, okay, .enabled, and we will set it to false, and that will make it disappear. Now once this has happened, this is where we want to wait for a couple of seconds, all right, and we'll just put a line in here, and then we want to turn all this back on again. So what you can do is to take all of these 3 lines here and just copy, so Command or Control C, or you can right click and click on copy, and just below the task.wait2, come down and paste this in, and we want to change all of these to the opposites. So timer GUI will now be false, transparency for our trigger part will be 0, and the surface GUI will be true. Whoops, true. Alright, and that is enough to give this a test. So come up to File, .save, and then click on Play to run the game. Alright, I'm all loaded in, and you'll see our part is here, and if I run over and run on top of it, the GUI pops up, and then this part, it's very quick at the moment. However, when I run on, the timer comes up, and then after 2 seconds this reappears. So that's what we want to have happen just at the moment. Alright, so if you've got that, you can stop and we can continue. Now that we have our trigger part working, we can write the functions in order to make the timer run, and we're going to do that using a module script. So if you've never used a module script, don't worry. By the end of this video, you'll wonder how you ever did without them. So click on Server Script Service, and then click on the plus sign next to it, and click on Module Script. Now, if it doesn't appear, just in the search box here, start typing module, and it will pop up to the top, and then go ahead and click on Module Script. Once you've got the module script, we're going to change this to be called Fun Mod Script. Now you'll notice that we don't get the traditional Hello World pop-up when we use one of these. We have this local module and return module here. And this is very important. We're going to change the word module, however, up here to be fun mod, and the same down the bottom, so fun mod. Right, and we'll just drop that whole thing down a couple of lines. Now, the thing about module scripts is that they do not run by themselves. They need to be required by another script, which we're going to use in the trigger script, in order to access their functions or whatever it is that you put inside of them. So we'll begin by creating our first function in here, where we're going to write 2, and then we will see how they run. All right. A little bit different in here to create a function. We start off by typing function in a module script, and then we type the name of the module that we are in. So this is funmod. Put a dot, and then we can put the name that we want to call our function. So this one will be, we'll call this start timer. All right, that's what it's going to do. A set of parentheses, and then hit enter, and you'll have an end. So this is how you can get a function into your module script. Now, as I said, if I put in here print, oops, if I spell it correctly, print, and we can say I'm in the mod script to begin with. If I run the game now, nothing will happen, all right, because nothing is called this. Even if I call it down here, nothing is going to happen because we need to call it from somewhere, or this needs to be required first, okay, in order to run. So if we come up to our trigger script, and right at the very top as the first item, we create a variable called funmod, and we use a special word called keyword called require. Okay, and then we put in the file path to it, so it'll be game.serverscriptservice.funmod, and that will give us access to anything that we create in here in terms of functions. Now, to run this function and print this out, the way we do it is, and we'll put this in the place where we're going to use it, and it will be down here. If you come down, and we're going to run this just after we turned off the surface GUI here. So just above where we've got our task wait here at the moment. And we want to access that function that we created here. So when you're in another script, what you can do is type in funmod and then dot, and you'll notice that your new function has popped up here, just like it would in helper text. And you can hit enter and then put a set of parentheses at the end, and that's all you need to do to call this. So now if I run this, you don't have to do this, but if I run the game, you'll notice down the bottom here that we should get this run when the player touches this, remember, because it's inside of here, and there it is. I'm in the mod script, it's run our function for us, and it ran it twice. So we'll come up here and stop. So now let's make use of this function to do something a little bit more useful. So this function's purpose will be to get our timer, and don't worry that this is showing, I've just enabled it so we can see it. But it's going to make this red part move across the screen in increments as the time decreases, and behind this is this indicator part, which is green. So it'll start green and then it'll get red as it moves across the screen here. Now the way that I've done this is to change each of these text labels. I've altered their Z index. Alright, so the very top one, if we have a look at time, is 5. So the higher the number, places this text label above the others, and then indicator is at 3 and bar is at 4. Alright, so it goes time on top, bar, and then the indicator down the bottom. And that we're going to reduce this size, which will make this go from green to red, and the time label we will update with how much time is left. Alright, so that's what's happening here. So we'll come back in here, and the first thing that because we're working with the timer GUI, we have that in our trigger script over here. So if we click on our trigger script, you'll see we've got our timer GUI, but we want to use it in our start timer. So inside of here, we'll pass it to the function. So timer GUI, and we're going to pass this through to the function. So in here, we can type in timer GUI. Alright, now once we get this timer GUI, now what we want to do is access the bar, the indicator, and the time. So we will, inside here, create some variables so we can make use of those. So local bar will be equal to timer GUI, and then at the end we have the frame and then bar. So we're doing this for each of them, so it'll be frame, bar, frame, indicator, etc. So local indicator equals timer GUI dot frame dot indicator, and local, and we'll call this one time label, because as you can see when we put time, that's a reserved word, it's come up in blue, so label, and we can't use that. So time label will be timer GUI dot frame dot and we'll say time in here. That's what we've called it in here. All right, and they're the variables that we'll make use of to make some changes. Now just below this, we'll also create a variable called timer and set it to 0. And this timer is going to be used to, it'll make more sense when we get down into the code here as to what it does, but for now just add it in. Alright, now that we have these variables, we need to think what's going to happen each time this runs. And as I said, we're going to change this bar label script to reduce its size, and it'll change its position and everything. So each time the function runs, what we want to do is put the bar back to how it was to begin with. And we'll do that just here. So we'll change its properties. We'll say bar dot background transparency will equal 1, so that will make it invisible. The bar dot size will equal udim2. Now udim2 is a method of changing two-dimensional items and properties in our GUI. So new, and when you do a udim, it uses, or can use, if I put in 0 here, scale offset, scale, offset. So you don't have to use all of them, but in this case we're just going to use the offset so that it matches the size of a standard text label, which is 0, 200, and then 0, 50. So we're using the offsets to set the bar size. Next, the bar dot position, right, will equal udim2 dot new, and we're going to make this all zeros, but what this effectively does is position this in the middle of the frame. Now it's not exactly correct. We actually want to align it with the indicator down here. So we'll initially set its position to 0, 0, 0, 0, but then we're going to make the changes below here to its position by saying bar position, so it's already been reset to 0, plus udim2.new, and we're going to use the indicator. So indicator dot size dot x, and then after this put a 0 and 0. Right, I'll just get rid of this. So in here it's taking the indicator size up here, which has not changed, and it's inserted this in here. Now its size is a two-dimensional x and y, so the last two are sort of taken out. Alright, so and this will position the bar back to its original location. And the last thing we want to do with the bar is say bar.visible will equal true, so that it's shown. Okay, that takes care of putting our bar back to how it started with. Now we'll write the next part of the code down here with that will actually alter the bar using a while loop. So we need two variables here. The first one will be countdown. Alright, and initially let's just set it to 5 that we put in here, but we'll change that shortly. And the second one will be max stages, and we'll also set this to be the same. Now what this means is that the countdown will be 5, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and the stages, we want to divide the bar, how much the bar decreases by, evenly for each second, and that's why we've made them the same. Now you may change max stages to something else and have it decrease slower, etc. However, keeping them the same makes it match up with the seconds. Alright, now just down below this we're going to now create a while loop. So put in here while, and we'll say countdown is greater than 0 do. So we've got a while loop, and we want each time this runs we want to pause for a second. So we'll put in here a task.wait of 1 second, and then we'll run all the code in here, and it will loop until countdown reaches 0. So we can say countdown minus equals 1. So countdown will reduce by 1 every second until it gets to 0, when the while loop will end. Now at the same time, the timer variable that we created up the top here earlier, we're going to increase that by 1 each time as well. So we can say plus equals 1. And then we will show you how or why this is used in here. So now we'll change the bar size. So bar.size, and it's going to equal udim2.new, and we're going to do a calculation in here for the scale of x. So x is across this way. Now when you use scale, the numbers are between 0 and 1. Alright, so 0.1, 0.2, etc. up to 1. So this calculation will be -1, and then we're going to divide that by, put a set of brackets, max stages, alright, divided by timer. And then after this put a comma with 0, 1. Now 1 is the scale for the height, and it's going to stay the same, and then 0. These are the two offsets. So what this does is it divides the max stages, which is 5 to start with, divided by timer, which initially will be 1, so 5 divided by 1, so -1 divided by this, and it will give us a small number that basically decreases it by the exact amount each time, so that it breaks it up into the correct 5 stages that we put up here. All right, a little bit confusing, but just trust me, and it will work when you see it run. The last part of this, we need to change our background transparency for our labels. So we're going to put in here bar.background transparency, and it's going to equal 0, and indicator dot background transparency will equal 0. And the last one that we want is we want to set the frame background to 0. So that will be in timer GUI, and then dot frame dot background transparency, and set it to 0. And that will wrap up our while loop. Now, when that while loop ends, what we want to do is give the player a message. So we'll put in here time label dot text equals, and we'll just say time's up. Okay, and now to make sure that this, we'll also change bar.visible equal to false, so that it disappears completely, and we'll add a task.wait in here of say 2 seconds, and then return true. So what this will do is ensure that we get to see this message before the timer resets, and then we can run the timer again, because if you didn't add this wait in, then this would run so quickly and then reset that you wouldn't even see this message. All right. Now, just before we test it, however, in case you have turned on your GUI, just come over to timer GUI here and scroll down to enabled, wherever that is, there it is, and just turn it off so it looks like this. And then we can click on file and save, and we can run the game. Right, I'm all loaded in, so now if I run over onto the timer, our button disappears. You can see that our timer is decreasing, and then it resets and comes back. All right, so that's what you're after. You want to run onto this. The only thing is that our time's up hasn't reset back up on here. It's still coming up, but that text is something that we're going to now update in the next part, where we'll write another short function that will show the numbers and count down for our countdown. So we'll stop it there and come back to our functions mod and just scroll up to the top where we have our start timer. Alright, this function that we're going to create here is very useful, not only in this project but others, so it's worth typing it out and getting it to work, because you will probably find other uses for it if you want to do any games that involve time. So let's create the function by typing function and then funmod, so the name of the mod we're in, and we'll call this one get time. Now we're going to need 2 bits of information in here, so we'll need our countdown. We'll also need our time label to update the time. And so if you've got those 2 in there, then hit enter and we can create. Now we're going to look at minutes as well as seconds in here, and I'll show you how that works when we test it at the end, and that way you understand how the effort that we go to in here will pay off. So the first thing we'll do is create a variable for minutes, which will be equal to math.floor, and inside here we're simply going to take countdown and divide it by 60. Alright, now at the moment we're working with seconds, so if countdown divided by 60 doesn't actually equal 1 or more, then we're not going to use minutes, but when it does, it will be useful. Alright, the next one is seconds, which will be countdown, and mod, which is the percentage sign, 60. If you've never used mod, basically what it does is divides this number by 60, and if there is a remainder, it will put the remainder over here, which effectively will give us numbers between 1 and 59. All right. If you don't believe me, you'll just have to trust me that that's how it works. All right. But it gives us the remainder. All right. Down below this, we'll create a variable called showTime, which will be equal to a blank string, and we're going to construct this string to return each time we want to update based on what these numbers give us back. So drop down a couple of lines and we'll do some conditional statements. So the first one will be if minutes is less than or equal to 0, then we are dealing with just seconds inside of here, and we'll give some messages. But first of all, we just need to put an else in here, and we'll do this last part first. So if seconds are less than 10, then showTime, so we're going to construct a string, will be equal to toString, because we need to change our numbers to be strings to join them together, minutes, ... and then a set of inverted commas, a space, and then a colon with a 0, ... okay, toString, and we'll put in here seconds, and then ... another set of inverted commas, seconds. So this line, what it does is if we have minutes, all right, so remember this part up here, we're going to do just seconds. This one's dealing with minutes and seconds. And this one in particular, if we have, say, 1 minute and 9 seconds, it's going to put a 0, all right, in front of whatever the seconds is. So it'll be 1:098, etc. Okay? Now we'll put in an else, and we'll make showTime. Now actually we can take a copy of this entire line here, because we just need to make one change and put it in here. All you need to do is come to where the 0 is and delete it, and then put the space back in there, and that will cover this. All right, so that's minutes and seconds. Now we'll come back up to the top here, and just after the then, drop down a line, and we'll say if seconds, all right, are less than 10, then, and we're going to say showTime will be equal to, and we'll put just a 0, and then ... toString seconds, and then after that ... colon and a space seconds, and drop down again and put else. Now actually we need to just put after this line here, we need to display this on the screen. So we're going to say time label dot text will equal showTime, which is what we just made here. Right, then we'll come down to this one here, and we can take both of these lines, so copy both of these and paste them in here. And all we need to do now is just at the beginning of this toString, come back and delete that 0 so it looks like that. And one more thing to finish off, down the bottom we have 3 ends here, so 1, 2, 3. Just here at the end of this one here, hit enter, and we just want to say time label dot text equals showTime. Now that we've completed our get time function, scroll up to the top, and we'll take a copy of the whole function call here. So highlight it and then right click and copy, and then we're going to scroll down to our start timer function inside of our while loop, and find the line bar.size at the end of that, and click, and then hit enter, and we're simply going to right click and paste that line in there. And each time this goes round and round, it's going to update the time label with the correct time. Right, that's enough for us to give us a test with our 5-second timer here. So let's click on File and Save, and let's play. Alright, I'm all loaded in the game, so let's run on to our trigger, and it disappears, and our time is 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Alright, shows our message, time up, and then the button reappears. And if you run on again, we did have that times up that appeared initially, which we could reset that back to just nothing at the very beginning if you wish. So we'll stop that there, and we'll just do one other test with minutes and just tidy up that little error there. So at the moment, times up text appears down the bottom here. Up the top here, so we've got our time label.text. Where we start up the top here, we can take our time label, so just below here, and say time label dot text, and we can say equals just a blank string, and that will get rid of that times up showing when it starts. Now the next thing, we just wanted to test to see if this minutes part up here works. Alright, so in order to do that, if we have a quick look at our trigger script, we have this timer in here which is 5, but we're not actually making use of that. We actually hard coded that 5 over here, if you remember, in here. So what we'll do is, instead of using these hard coded numbers, we're going to pass this value to the function. So if we just scroll down to where we're calling our start timer, put a comma at the end and add this timer. So we're going to pass this value through to our function over here now. So up the top where we call our start timer, put a comma and put in here that name, this timer. And now instead of down here with our countdown and stages, we'll simply make this timer set that value to both of these. Now what this lets us do is, if we want to now make any changes over here to this, then we can simply change this number to say 300. Alright, and if you wanted to change in here, well, we could write code to do it, but if we came over into our text label for our timer part, and we could come down here and change this to say 300 now, so 300, and that will match up, and we can click on File and Save, and let's see how that runs. Right, I'm all loaded in. We've got 300 seconds. If I run onto this, now you'll see it comes up with 4 minutes 56 seconds and counting down. So that's 5 minutes, and that will continue to count down. You'll see that when it gets to single digits, we'll have 4, 0, 9, etc. And when it gets right down the bottom, and you'll notice that the stages that it's counting down, see how it's very fractional, and it's just slowly getting smaller. So that's how and why this is a very useful thing to put into any games with times that you want to run. And I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. I know it's been a bit long, but hopefully you get a lot out of it. I'll see you in future videos. If you found this video useful, subscribe now. For more information about my online courses, go to mrbrendanross.com.